Okay, so let's get out of the endomembrane system for a while, and then we're going to talk about basically how the cell acquires and processes energy. So, all cells have what are called mitochondria, and plant cells have what are called chloroplasts. Okay, chloro meaning green, so that's kind of like where that term comes from. So, mitochondria and chloroplasts change energy from one form to another. So we'll talk about them in general, and then we'll get into specifics. So mitochondria are the sites of what we call cellular respiration. Now, I know this may be a new concept to you. If you've had biology last time in high school, it's probably something that is probably long forgotten because it is a little bit complicated. But basically, what happens here in cell respiration is that you have sugar plus oxygen gives you CO2, that's carbon dioxide plus water, plus energy. Okay, and that energy is in the form of a molecule called ATP. Okay, so this is what mitochondria do. Okay, and I'm just going to basically put all this together really quick because we're going to come back to this quite a bit. Chloroplasts, which are found only in plants and algae, are the sites of photosynthesis. Okay, so photosynthesis, and it's a long word, photosynthesis, okay, is CO2 is taken in by the plant. So is water. You got to water your plants, of course, right? H2O. And you get sugar. Plants obviously make sugar and oxygen. So what did I do here? I basically just reversed this equation, right? By the way, the energy coming in here for photosynthesis is not ATP. Well, actually, it is a little bit, and we'll talk about that later. It's sunlight, right? So by using sunlight, plants that go through photosynthesis can turn carbon dioxide and water into sugar and oxygen, which are both important for animals. We breathe oxygen and we eat sugar, right? Now, once animals get a hold of that, like say in a mitochondria, right, they use that sugar and oxygen. They get energy from it. That's the ATP that makes us animals work, right? And they release CO2 and H2O. Well, guess where that goes? Right back into the plants again. This is why they say it's kind of a legend, but I guess it kind of makes sense. It's good to talk to your plants, right? So you're breathing CO2 on them and a little bit of water from your breath. They bring it in and turn it into sugar and oxygen. So weird to think that your breath actually turns into sugar when a plant gets a hold of it, right? But that's what happens. It uses that chemistry to make sugars, right? So mitochondria and chloroplasts, as I said before, are not part of the endomembrane system. Okay, so we're going to talk about these as we go. So mitochondria are in nearly all eukaryotic cells. Actually, I don't know of any cells that aren't bearing mitochondria right now, but I'm sure there must be some if they're saying nearly all. They have smooth outer membranes and an inner membrane which is folded into what we call cristae. Okay, not a person, but it's pronounced cristae. Um, the inner membrane creates two compartments. Okay, that's called the intermembrane space and the mitochondrial matrix. Okay, so we'll talk about those and I'll show you in a diagram in a second. This is where a large amount of cellular respiration happens. We'll break these steps down eventually. I wouldn't really worry about it right now, but just suffice to say for now that this is where cellular respiration, the breaking down of CO2, or sorry, the breaking down rather of sugar and oxygen into energy occurs. Okay, so cristae present a large surface area for enzymes that do this. Okay, and surface area is a big thing in biology. So what mitochondria look like is a little jelly bean, I guess, kind of cut in half, but it's got all these little tiny membranes on the inside that are, increasing the surface area. Okay, so it's got an intermembrane space, so that's between the two membranes, of course, right? It's also got, the cristae, and this is where most of the cellular respiration actually happens. Now, the matrix is the liquid inside. I'm just trying to refer to what we talked about in the last slide. And, that's pretty much it. Now, the weird thing about these is that they have DNA and they also have their own ribosomes. Remember, this is a part of another cell, right? So this is an animal cell. Why would mitochondria need their own ribosomes or have their own ribosomes and have their own DNA? That's kind of weird. It's like, well, the cell already has DNA. What do you need these for? The sort of story goes, the theory is that these are not actually originally part of the cells that they're living in. And you got to go way back in evolutionary time, billions of years probably to actually see this. But these mitochondria, these little, organelles that we call them now, were probably at one point free living bacteria. Okay. So bacteria have their own DNA. As you can see, this one has its own DNA, right? Bacteria have their own ribosomes. This one has its own ribosomes. Bacteria also have a double membrane, right? So this one has the double membrane because it's got the space in between. So this is a lot of good evidence that actually suggests that mitochondria were probably taken up by cells as bacteria way a long time ago, billion years ago or so, right? And they were not digested like in phagocytosis, they were actually tolerated. The bacteria started making energy. The rest of the cell liked that. So now they're living together in harmony, right? We call this symbiosis, right? So like, we call this the endosymbiotic theory. So in other words, you now have two organisms, two different origins of organisms living together and living together harmoniously, right? They are benefiting each other. The mitochondria is making energy for the cell. The cell is giving the mitochondria food and a place to live, right? Think like Finding Nemo and the sea anemone, or there's a whole bunch of different you know, uh, examples in nature, and this is the microscopic one. So chloroplasts are not there to do cellular respiration; they're there to capture light energy. Okay, so chloroplasts basically contain the green pigment, which is called chlorophyll. Okay, chlorophyll is what makes plants green, right? As well as enzymes and other molecules that function in photosynthesis, which I just outlined a couple slides ago, right? So chloroplasts are found in leaves and other green organs of plants and algae. Animals do not have chloroplasts. Wouldn't it be nice if we did? We could sit around the pool in the sun and not have to worry about eating. Although I kind of like eating. I don't know about you guys, right? So we could just sit out in the sun, make all the sugar that we wanted just by breathing the air and drinking some water. So that's what plants are doing, right? So chloroplast structure includes thylakoids, these little membranes on the inside, and what is called the stroma. So if you look at this is a chloroplast. Okay, it's got the green chlorophyll, which are basically filling up, they look like little stacks of pancakes or Oreo cookies. The membrane that holds the chlorophyll is called the thylakoid. The fluid on the inside of the cell, and I know it doesn't look like it really much here, but the fluid on the inside of the cell is called the stroma. Um, I don't really care if you know the other structures for this, because it's very, very similar to what a mitochondria will do. But this is where photosynthesis happens. It happens in the green pigment, right? That chlorophyll inside the thylakoid in these little green stacks of pancakes here. Okay. Notice also, however, there is DNA and ribosomes in this structure, which is part of another cell. So the same thing goes for chloroplasts. We think that they were probably photosynthetic bacteria a billion years ago or so. Plants, or what eventually became plants, took these chloroplasts in and they started to live harmoniously together. Now, think about it. Wouldn't it be cool if you could actually get chloroplasts to live in your cells because of all the sugar they're making all the time, right? All you need is some sunlight and they're going to make energy for you, in the form of food. So I think, as far as this goes, this is just more evidence that living things over the course of, natural history have adapted to live together and live together symbiotically sometimes. So like I said, we're going to be talking about the energy processing of a cell, photosynthesis, cellular respiration. We'll talk more about that as we go through the chapters here, or, so further down the line. So I don't want to really get bogged down on that conversation yet. We still have to talk about the remainder of the cell parts. And one of those is what we call the cytoskeleton. Now, I think I've told you a couple times at this point, cyto means cell, and obviously skeleton is there, or a skeleton is there to support the inside of the cell. Okay, it organizes the cell structures, and it also, anchors some of the organelles in place, during transitionary periods, like when the cell wants to divide and make more of itself. Okay, these, sorry, the cytoskeleton is made of three different types of filaments and tubules, which are all made out of, you guessed it, they're all made out of different proteins. Okay, and that's what we're going to be talking about in the next few slides. So to kind of visualize this, because I know it's like, wow, I didn't know a cell had a skeleton in it, right? It's not the, traditional skeleton that you might think of. These are protein filaments, so they're kind of like, little hair-like things that go all throughout in between organelles, from one side of the cell membrane to the other. So, you can barely make it out in this picture. I think it's much better than I could draw, though. And, if you were to zoom in on that, it would look like this, just this meshwork of protein filaments that allows the cell to organize itself on the inside and also gives it some support. So, in addition to support, which is the first bullet point here, it also can interact with what are called motor proteins to produce motility. So, you know how we said that, inside the cell there are vesicles that move around from one side to the other? Well, these are moved by what are called motor proteins. Now, these were only discovered, probably like about 30 years ago or so. And I know that sounds like a long time, but in biology, when you've been looking at a cell over and over and over again for hundreds of years, it's pretty amazing that we just discovered these, right? So think about it. You're a scientist, you're a graduate student or whatever, and somebody wants you to figure out, well, how do those little vesicles inside know where to go? Like, how do they go to the part of the cell that needs them, right? And somebody might say, well, what do you think? They just walk there. Well, that's kind of what they do. It's really, really strange, right? So inside the cell, these little vesicles can travel along the cell membrane, or sorry, not the cell membrane, the cell skeleton rather, by motor proteins, which basically use them as like little monorails, and they walk these vesicles full of stuff through the cell. It's so crazy. I'll show you a video in a second. Okay. So, obviously this is going to help to regulate biochemical activities. So if you look at this vesicle protein here, right? So this vesicle is holding a bunch of stuff on the inside that the cell made, right? Underneath it is a protein, kind of looks like a little wishbone, and it's literally walking on one of the components of the cytoskeleton, right? So this is a microtubule of the cytoskeleton. This is what we call the motor protein. It's literally taking steps forward and dragging this vesicle with it like Santa Claus, right? I mean, it's crazy. Now, it needs ATP to do that because it needs some sort of energy, but that's what happens. So I'm going to try to see if I can embed a video in here, and actually record it for you. I might even narrate over it so you can actually see how this works. Okay, I hope this works. I hope this is not ridiculous. Okay, so what I want you to look at in this picture here, and I'll start it playing in a second, is this big ball. That's a vesicle, right? Obviously, we're talking about a huge amount of magnification here. This is all computer image, right? So obviously, these are not real structures. What I want you to pay attention to is right here. Okay, so this is that little motor protein that I told you about, right? And what it's walking on, this strip here, is a component of the cytoskeleton that we call a microtubule. All right. So if you keep watching this, what you're going to see is the cell, or sorry, the motor protein rather, is literally walking and dragging this ginormous vesicle along this part of the cytoskeleton, this microtubule. So see these little feet? This is not a living thing. This is a chemical. It's a protein molecule, right? Just like we talked about in the last chapter. And it's literally walking down, just play this again really quick. It's literally walking down that microtubule and dragging the vesicles with it. And you can see that one in the background. So, if you ever wondered, how's this stuff moving around inside my cells? We actually have something that's walking around. Like right now, there's something walking around in your cells, taking what your cell needs from one end and bringing it to another. It's crazy. Who would ever thought? But they've proven this experimentally. It's pretty amazing stuff. Okay, so what I just showed you obviously is a lot more complicated than this picture, but that's what you saw, right? The big vesicle, little motor feet, right, with ATP walking down one of those microtubules of the cytoskeleton. So one of those little protein filaments, right? So if you look at this, this is an actual picture of the little guy in action, right? Or girl, I don't know what it is. There's the vesicles, right? Here's that microtubule that's being walked on, and I believe this right here, okay, is that motor protein that's dragging it from the left side to the other, right, to the right, So pretty amazing stuff. Who would have thought? All right, so I'm going to end this here. I'm right at 14 minutes and 18 seconds here. So let me end this here, and we're going to keep going. We'll probably got about another, I don't know, 2 or 3 videos or so. It's a very long unit, right? And I'll have these posted for you guys soon.